Welcome back to Under One Roof MTL, where we are demystifying home ownership one episode at a time. I'm Robin Flynn, joined as always in studio by LJ Aguinaga of LJ Realties. How's it going, LJ?
It's going great. How are you doing?
Very, very well. Martin Spalding of Fred and Martin Mortgages. How are you, Martin?
I'm outstanding. Thank you for asking.
Now, this is going to be a very, very special episode of Under One Roof because we are coming towards the end of the year and we've been promising this special edition for a few weeks now. Now, before I explain, I do want to get our trivia question of the week out. It's brought to you by Felix and Norton Cookies. You can visit their store at the Blue Haven Shopping Center, 3705 St. John's Boulevard in DDO. The first person to text in the correct response to 514-800 receives delicious Felix and Norton cookies delivered straight to their door. Our question this week: what type of real estate ownership allows multiple individuals to own a fraction of a property and use it for a specific time period each year? If you think you know it, 514-790-0800 is the number to text in. Now, as I teased at the beginning, this is a special edition of Under One Roof MTL this week. Home economics class is in session. And I'm very excited for this because I took home ec in high school and I learned how to sew and bake a pie. I don't feel like I learned super duper useful economic skills that I had to sort of figure out myself in my 20s as I grew up and got my first credit card and maxed it out and had no idea what interest rates were. These are the kind of skills that our kids should probably have before they become adults. So we're going to break it down into sort of 3 different chunks for you. Round 1, household budget and debt management. Now, household budget management is something that I only started doing 5 years ago, if you can believe that. I was in my 30s when I actually started tracking my spending. Now, I'm pretty good with Microsoft Excel, so I created a spreadsheet for myself, plugged in a bunch of different formulas so it would do all the math for me to track what was coming in and what was going out. Transferred it over to Google so that my husband could access it as well and plug in all of his information. That's what we do to track our expenses and income. But I think a lot of people probably don't even realize what they're spending. And I'm looking at you, things like streaming services, subscription services that pop up on your bills every month. So I'm going to turn to you guys who are kind of the experts in helping people figure out their financial system, their financial situation so that they can purchase a property, so that they can find their dream home, so that they can refinance and pay off debts. What would be your recommendations? We'll start with you, Martin, maybe, for household budget management.
So let me turn the table on you a little bit.
Sure.
And when you did the exercise, what was ultimately your goal by creating a household budget? Did you want to track your spending? Did you want to track your spending because you wanted to put some money aside because you wanted to go on a special vacation? Did you put some money aside because you wanted to do some renovations? Did you want to pay off some debt? So ultimately, why did you think it was important to create a household budget?
In our case, it was because my husband and I had just bought our first home, and we suddenly had these new expenses that we had not previously had. So we wanted to have a clear picture of everything that we were spending so that we could better allocate our funds. And it was very quickly visible to us that we were spending a lot of money on things that we really didn't need. And we were able to sort of see that in a spreadsheet form. Wow, we are spending $700 a year on, streaming services. Do we really need every single streaming service, or can we cut down to maybe 1 or 2? It allowed us to make those kinds of decisions so that that money could be perhaps better allocated elsewhere.
So, in the same stream of thought, did you then break it down as to needs? Things that I got to pay my mortgage, got to pay the light bill, got to pay my streaming services, gotta. So, did you break it down in needs and wants? And the needs you can't touch. It's sort of a fixed expense, and wants you could fall under variable expense. And did you attack the variable expenses and say, listen, if we want to go on that vacation, if we want to take our daughter to Disney World one day, this is where we need to attack. And 152 streaming services we do not need.
Yeah, that was basically it. I mean, there are some variable expenses that you can't do anything about, right? Vet bills popping up, for example. We have a cat and a dog, so that kind of stuff is fairly unpredictable. But then we created a discretionary fund to cover these kinds of expenses that were a little bit more variable. But absolutely, this enabled us to allocate certain funds every month to pay down some of our debts because both my husband and I still have some debts and put some money aside for rainy day fund, as we call it, just in case, something pops up with the roof or, this summer we had to make a repair on our HVAC system, those kinds of things. We were able to dip into that fund.
Okay. And one last exercise, and then I'll hand it off to LJ. Did you take your credit card statement or statements and do a line by line audit of your credit card? Because it's amazing. We talked about this in the past storage, right? Storage is one of the all time worst expenses. Yeah, everybody needs a little extra room, but whatever you put in storage, more than likely is out of sight, out of mind. But what is constantly reminding you that you've got stuff in storage is that credit card bill that you receive every month. And at one point, and this is what happened in our household, we had been paying for storage for 5 years. I hadn't the foggiest idea what we had in storage, but clearly we no longer needed it. So I called some buddies up and said, "Listen, this is what I think I have. Bring a truck. It's all yours. And whatever you don't take, we're going to bring to the Salvation Army." So by doing that exercise, it was a flagrant expense that I no longer needed to pay, but it was on my credit card. And often, like most people, you see, how much do I owe? What's my minimum? I'm going to pay either or and move on and wait till next month, as opposed to stopping down and taking the time going, I'm going to do a line by line audit. And I bet you there are some expenses in there that you're paying that you no longer need.
100%. And for me, it literally is subscriptions. I don't know about you guys, but when did everything become a subscription based service? Like, I purchased Microsoft Office for my computer, but I still have to pay a monthly subscription service in order to actually use Microsoft Word. If you don't pay it, all of a sudden you can't access your files, which is ludicrous. You used to be able to buy software and own it. So that is honestly one of my biggest expenses is those recurring subscriptions. They're not very much. They're often $10, $15 a month, but when you have 25 of them coming out every month for various things, it can get very expensive. So that to me is the shocking part is when you have multiple pages of credit card statements between me and my husband for things like subscription model based services. And they're not all Netflix and entertainment services. Some of them are things that you wouldn't even realize that you pay. I'm a bit of a news junkie, so I'm paying for New York Times, Washington Post, Montreal Gazette. Like, there is no aggregate service. I wish there was a better aggregate service where you could pay, like, a one-time fee and that's gonna cover everything. But, yeah, those subscription services, that's what'll get you.
So after you'd done the entire exercise, did you manage to identify some discretionary funds that you could either put into savings, invest, or just have for an emergency fund? So you just mentioned you have a dog and a cat. Dogs and cats have to go see the vet, can be very pricey. And the last thing you want to do is have to put that on your visa and not be able to pay the balance at the end of the month and start paying interest for taking care of your pets. So if you can put aside like $1,000 for an emergency fund, and then when the dog or the cat gets sick and the vet bill comes in at 550, you've got that in cash and you don't have to go to credit. And because I'm assuming if you can't put aside the $1,000, you're not necessarily utilizing credit appropriately, and you end up not paying 550, you're paying 550 plus interest, plus interest, plus interest, plus interest until you finally pay it off. And so that vet visit for your cat is no longer 550 once you've paid for it, it's $1,000. So after you've done the exercise, can you 5 or 10% in savings based on your net incomes to put aside into an emergency fund and or to start invest so you can compound that money and start building wealth. Or in our world, start putting money aside for a down payment so that you can call LJ and say, I'm ready to buy.
Let's
Which
do it.
is the call that LJ likes to hear, right? You get that phone call that's, "Hey, I've saved up my down payment and I'm ready to rock and roll." My goal, and this is what my dad had always told me, was that you should try to have 3 months worth of your living expenses saved up. So part
Absolutely.
of this exercise was great at determining how much actually do we need for 3 months worth of living expenses, and then that became our savings goal. To put aside that money so that if we needed it, if something were to happen to either of our income sources, then we would have a bit of a buffer. Now, is 3 months sort of the rule of thumb there? Like, LJ, what would be your recommendation for living expenses saved up?
Look, it really depends on your risk tolerance. I'd say 3 to 6 months is a really good buffer to have. That's what we usually recommend. And then there's different ways of doing it, right? You might decide to have 3 months in cash or in a high interest savings account that you have complete access to. And maybe the other 3 months is in a relatively safe investment, maybe some stock, a blue chip stock, something of that nature, where you are still gaining something. You're not really concerned about some crazy crash. And obviously, you're not concerned about or hoping that if it were to happen, that you did have to dip into it, they're not both going to happen at the same time. The market is crashing at the same time that you need access to a couple extra funds. So a variation of that probably makes sense. It might even just be investing in a bond or something of that nature, but something where you're going to have access to the funds, but you're also not tying it up and losing money on it because of inflation, especially with how high it's been for the last couple of years. The last thing I want is for you to have $1,000 saved up and all of a sudden it's worth $700 at the end of the year or at the end of 2 years because it hasn't been doing anything, right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You're listening to Under One Roof MTL on CJD 800. That's LJ, that's Martin, I'm Robin. This is a very special edition of Under One Roof MTL, home economics class in session. Still to come, how can you figure out how much house you can afford when you're shopping around? We'll discuss after we check traffic at the CJD 800 Traffic Center. This is Under One Roof MTL on CJD 800. I'm Robin. That's Martin. That's LJ. And we are with you until 1 p.m. Home Ec is in session. This time around, we're talking about home ownership, mortgages and home ownership, insurance, all that fun stuff. Now, LJ, for homeowners, what does that discussion look like when somebody comes to you and says, LJ, I'm ready. I've got some money saved up. I think I've got enough for a down payment and closing costs. How do you help them determine affordability, their options, and things like that?
So the first thing we do is I'm going to ask them, do you have a pre-approval? Have you already gone to your bank to find out if you're pre-qualified? If not, then we're going to reach out to Fred Martin to get them pre-approved so we can move on to the next step. At the same time, we go over a budget. Basically, how much would you like to spend? Even if you don't know how much you qualify for today, how much do you feel comfortable contributing to your monthly shelter costs? And then from that, I can run a scenario for them and say, okay, well, roughly with this payment, with the down payment that you just gave me under these amortizations and current interest rates, you're looking at purchasing a property in this price range. Now, again, we're always going to go confirm with the bank that they are able to qualify for that amount. But usually, when I take out the calculator and I run people through scenarios, it's very apparent what they feel comfortable with. I'll say, hey, how does this look? And they'll be like, oh, that's a bit too much. I was actually thinking of spending closer to $2,500 a month. Or sometimes they're like, you know what? I think we can bring it up to $4,000 a month, whatever it might be based on their situation, right? So whenever you actually take the time to whip out the calculator and go through the numbers with people, people can really understand what their monthly costs are and they can really picture their budget moving forward. So I always find that super helpful for our clients. At the same time, that's the meeting where I go over everything. They say, I think I have enough for closing costs and the down payment, but I'm going to walk them through all the expenses. We're talking closing costs that are going to include the inspection fees, the notary fees, the welcome tax fees, the adjustments, possibly title insurance, all that stuff, and kind of what it all includes, what it could look like, and how to prepare for it really so that we can, first of all, ensure that you are really, really ready. And even if you're not ready, and this is the part that I really want to hammer home, a lot of times people don't reach out because they say, oh, I know I'm not ready yet. But if you don't meet with me, you're probably not going to know when you are ready yet. And you're not going to know what goal you're working towards and what steps you need to take. So I love meeting with people who are even a year out, even longer if necessary, so we can build a plan together to get you to where you want to go in terms of home ownership. And that way you have a North Star to follow and a path to really go on. So that's what I love doing with clients at that point.
One of the expenses that I surprised me at how high it was were my property taxes. I didn't realize how much I would be paying on an annual basis for, living in my community and owning a property in that community. Now, usually these property tax bills come in once a year and you can either pay it in full or they'll allow you to pay it in, 3 or 4 installments. So, in our case, for example, we do the installments option. We pay 4 times a year, send them post dated checks. It's the only checks that I still write. Everything else I pay online. And the way my husband and I budget for that is, we take our annual property tax bill, our estimate of what it'll be for next year, and we divide that by 12. And then we each split that in half, and we contribute that into a joint account that we have for home expenses. So that way, when it's time for the check to come out, we never have to worry about the funds being there. They're always in that account because we've been contributing to it monthly. That's what made more sense for me in my head, was how to budget it that way. Um, do you have any other recommendations for people for things like this that are not necessarily, one-time fees or something that can be broken down into multiple payments?
That's 100% the way to go. And every time I do the budget for people in the monthly, I include your mortgage payments, I include your taxes, I include your insurance. We can include heating in there. And then beyond that, obviously, I tell people everything else you've been paying for rental, your food, your shelter, your Wi-Fi, etc. You're going to have all those costs as well. But even though you're right, while we get that bill once a year, and it's usually in 2 or 3 payments depending on the municipality, budget for it monthly so you can actually be prepared for it, and so that you're not chasing after it. Even certain banks, whenever, especially you do an insured mortgage, they force you to pay them the taxes, and then they keep those funds in escrow. And then when the bill comes in, you send in the bill, they take care of it for you. But they do it in that exact way. They basically divide it by 12, they add that amount to your mortgage payment, and you're paying it every single month because as humans, our nature is to budget monthly. We can't deal with an annual budget. It's very difficult to live and comprehend that whenever we're planning forward. So what you just suggested is exactly the way I suggest for everyone to do it.
I would add to that, if you don't see it, you don't feel it, then you won't spend it. So, in other words, if you get the lender to collect your municipal and school taxes for you and have them pay your taxes every year, then you don't have to think about saving. So if you're not good at saving and for some reason you go, there's $150 more in my account. Oh, I forgot that's for my municipal and school taxes this year. And you go out and spend it. When you do get that bill, it can be a sticker shock. So why not, if you're not good at saving, just incorporate it within your mortgage? They'll collect it for you. And at the end of the year, they'll pay it for you.
Now, what would you recommend for couples who are married or unmarried who have purchased a property together? Some people are kind of shocked when I tell them that my husband and I still have our own accounts. I have my own checking account for my money, and my husband has his own checking account for his money. And we have a joint account for household expenses. So every month we each put money into that account, and everything that we need to pay related to the house comes out of that account. Any bills that we have that are our own, like a cell phone or what have you, comes out of our own personal accounts. And when I explain that to people, they're like, isn't that crazy? Like, what's his is yours, what's yours is his. But that's what makes sense for us. What do you think is more common for couples? What do you usually see?
I'm in your boat, to be honest. So we run our household the exact same way. We have the joint account. We each have our own accounts, right? I'm self-employed technically, so my income can be variable, and I have all sorts of expenses for the company, and then subdivided into the other things as well. Um, so we run it the exact same way. But you're right. I get that same look, like, oh my god, you guys are married, you have a kid together, you have a house together. Why isn't it all just going into one pot? It's just because there's so many things going on in my life as an entrepreneur that this is the easier way to manage. I don't want to almost. Scare my wife with all the different things that I have going on, obviously, to manage. And it's I have a full time bookkeeper for that, right? So I run it the exact same way as you, and I think that's what works for us. And there's no right or wrong answer. I know a lot of couples that run it in a shared account, and everything's very systematic. But I think when one person's self employed, I think the way that we run it probably makes the most sense because we have those variable expenses. Because in our head we're planning ahead because of different things that we know, and basically having to run all those things through a second set of eyes or person is almost like a secondary audit at all times, which I think is just not necessarily worth the hassle at that point in time. We've got the common expenses, we got all this set up. We can plan for vacations, etc., and everything from the common. But beyond that, I think at least whenever you're self-employed, this simplifies things a little bit for us.
Yeah, and I would add to that the importance of actually doing that household budget so that you know what the common expenses are, so that each individual in the couple knows that, to run our household on a monthly basis costs us $2,500. Now, you could prorate it as to people's incomes, or you could just say we're 50-50 in this relationship. We're going to put each 1250 into the pot. And that way it alleviates, you're not pulling your weight, you're not doing this, you're not doing that. You try to make it as fair and you may try to make it as reasonable as possible. I know I'm taking all the love and emotion out of the relationship, but there is a part to a relationship that there's a practical part to it. So I think a household budget and splitting the expenses fairly is a practical way of looking at things, and it avoids any confrontations or any animosity or any misunderstandings when you're managing your household.
I think
Part of
fairly is
managing
really
your
the word. And I think fairly is really the word to underline there, right? Fair doesn't mean equal. Fair is in the proportions that make sense for everybody, especially when somebody's on mat leave, right? And their incomes are even additionally reduced, right? We're a family unit. We work together to get to the common goal at the end, obviously. And it's keeping these things in mind so that everyone's pulling their weight in the same direction. And so we can get there as a unit effectively.
It's right there in the marriage vows. If you remember, I only got married 7 years ago, so I still remember my vows. But the legal part that the Quebec government makes you read says that you have to contribute equally respective to your means and that your contributions can happen inside the home. Like it's specifically outlined in the legal portion of getting married. So maybe just pay attention to that part when you're saying I do. That's the important part.
You mean the fine print that most people don't read?
Yeah, exactly. Read the fine print of everything.
Well,
Most,
that's a whole other conversation.
yeah,
And
for
right,
sure.
whether it's the streaming services, whether it's your mortgage, whether it's whatever, most people go top line, bottom line, and sign and don't read anything in between. And I know we're going to talk about insurance, we're going to talk about a lot of things, but take the time to read what these clauses say. I mean, some of them are mumbo jumbo and they're done on purpose. So if you can't convince them, confuse them, and just get them to sign on the bottom line.
Yes, and I think that happens often when people have to file an insurance claim and realize they don't have coverage for something that they thought they did have coverage for. Now, I'm a crazy person who likes to read, so every year when my new insurance document comes in, the new contract, I always read it because I want to check and see if absolutely anything has changed. I want to know absolutely everything about that document. And it's crazy how detailed it is about how much coverage you have based on different events occurring. And I know it's a hot topic right now, but a lot of people don't have the amount of flood insurance that they think that they do and only figure that out when they are flooded.
It's so funny you say that because obviously with global warming and the shifts in temperature, the impact or the strength of storms today, you live in the middle of Beaconsfield and all of a sudden you're flooded. My sister's basement in Point Claire, she's nowhere near Lake St. Louis, and her basement was flooded because of a storm and everything lifted in the basement. It was a total gut. And thank God she had the right insurance to cover herself for the basement. Had she not, it would have probably cost her 30, 40, $50,000 to repair the basement. And that goes for there were a washer and dryer down there, there were clothes down there was storage down there was a full bedroom, there were TVs, there were computers, all kinds of stuff down there wiped out because she had 3 feet of water and all the wood panels. She had wood floors in the basement, which is, maybe not recommended, but everything lifted. So it was a total gut job, and thankfully, she had the right insurance because she took the time to read the policy.
Crazy idea. I wonder what the percentage is of people who actually do read their policy the first time they sign it, let alone annually when the new policy comes in. Like, how many people are actually like me and reading this document? Probably not
Sub
very many.
5%. Sub 5%.
Wow.
Oh, yeah, and you're being generous, LJ.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, if you're ready to become a homeowner and you have any questions about what we just discussed, get in touch with LJ. He'll help you find the perfect house or condo. You can reach him at 514 500 4040. Up next, paying your taxes and investing in your future. Our home economic special continues after the news. This is Under One Roof MTL on CJAD 800. I'm Robin Flynn. That's Martin Spalding from Fred and Martin Mortgages. That's LJ Aguinaga of LJ Realties. We are doing a home economics special this week. This time around, we are talking about paying your taxes and investing in your future. Now, we briefly mentioned this a little bit earlier about the different kinds of taxes you have to budget for, your income taxes, your own taxes, municipal taxes, school taxes. And if you do not pay your taxes, you can be facing things like penalties, interest charges, a whole bunch of unfun things. So, what is your recommendation? Maybe we'll start with you this time, Martin. For making sure you know exactly how much you're going to have to pay and doing so in an organized and timely fashion.
Okay, well, there are two buckets. So there are people who are self-employed, right? And then there are people who are employed. Self-employed, they generate T1s at the end of the year. If they're not tax at source, they need to put money aside to make sure that whenever their tax bill comes out, when their notice of assessment comes out, they can pay. When you work for a large company, you usually get a T4 in your tax at source, so it's less of a concern. However, in Quebec, we have two filings. We have the Quebec filing and we have the Canadian filing. And what we have is what's called a progressive tax rate. So the more you make, the more you're taxed. Very similar to if you're self employed. The more you decide to take out of your company, the more you're going to get taxed on it. So you just got to be aware that the most dangerous thing is yes, you can pay interest if you don't pay your taxes in time. And the Canadian government and the Quebec government are happy to charge you interest on it. But the worst thing that can happen to you if you're a homeowner and you don't pay your taxes is the government will take what's called a legal hypothec against your property. Will take a lien against your property. And that comes with a whole set of issues and problems that you just don't want to have to deal with. It also drops your principal mortgage to a second rank, and most lenders detest that. And so pay your taxes in time. If you can't, then call the government bodies and negotiate. Get onto a payment plan. But, there's an old adage, you're born, you pay taxes, you die. That's the three things that every human being has in common. We're born, we pay taxes, we die. And those who get away without paying taxes are like the Unabomber living in a shed in the woods.
And even then, I'm sure they have a bill that they owe. They just don't know about it.
Exactly. Once he comes out of the woods, we're going to get you.
Exactly. Um, in addition to paying your taxes, you also need to save and invest in your future. Now, if you want to be able to retire someday, which I don't know about you guys, but I would like to one day, maybe, hopefully, you need to be putting some money aside and you need to do it in a smart way. It's not just about, putting some pennies in a piggy bank in the corner of your room. You need to have an actual strategy. And the best way to do that is probably to speak with an expert such as a wealth advisor or a financial advisor, right, guys?
Well, I mean, the best thing to do is if you work for a large company, more than likely they have a pension plan, they have a stock buying plan. Leverage all the opportunities that have been given to you. So, if you can invest more into your pension, again, out of sight, out of mind, it's growing wealth. If you can get into the stock buying program, sometimes you buy three, they give you one. And then you look at all the government opportunities, your tax free savings account, your RRSP, the school fund, everything that you can leverage and leverage two times. In other words, if you get a return, roll it in. If you get another return, roll it in and use the same money to benefit from multiple programs because it's not gaming the system, it's just learning how to leverage the system to your advantage.
One of the things that I wasn't aware of is that when you stop working at a company, you're still eligible for the pension that you accrued while you work there. And usually when you leave, they'll give you documents to do something with that money. Basically, you can roll it into an existing account that you have, leave it where it is and let them manage it, and then you can still claim it later on when you retire, right? Even if you worked somewhere 40 years ago, you are still eligible for the pension that you accrued while you were working there, right?
100%. Anything that you've contributed to is entirely yours, right? And the idea is they're going to hold on to it, they're going to manage it. But once you are eligible to start using it, it is entirely yours, and you don't lose that just because you've moved on to a different company or gone self-employed, etc.
I don't know. I've left large companies and leaving the money that I've accrued in their hands after leaving doesn't really interest me that much. So what I usually do is I have it transferred either to my brokerage or into whatever account I want to manage. And then I gauge the level of risk that I want to take with the money that I'm investing. And so I think the most important thing in investing is to have a diversified portfolio. So, the higher the risk, the higher the return. but it can backfire on you. So you know what? A lot of my friends went into crypto, lost their shirts. A lot of my friends went into crypto and made a ton of money. You can also go to Blue Bonnets and bet on horse number 5, Lucky Charms in race number 5. And if you want to risk your funds, you can do it that way as well. So just remember, the higher the risk, the higher the return, the lower the risk, the lower the return. So a diversified portfolio. But I always come back to the same thing, your house. Principal residence remains your best investment in Canada because you don't pay capital gains once you sell it, and that can be your retirement fund. So if you manage to buy a house and it's worth $500,000 or $600,000 and you decide to sell it, well, with that $600, that $600,000, if we were talking about it earlier, if you're making 5% on that money, that could be enough cash flow plus your pension, um, to support a nice or a decent little lifestyle.
Or you can stay in your home and take out a reverse mortgage, and that's an option.
That well, clearly, Robin's been hanging around with us a little too long now.
Well, you got that, like, completely revolutionized what my expectations were for retirement, because I was getting nervous as I'm approaching 40 that I didn't have enough saved up. You see all these little videos on TikTok being, "You should have XYZ saved up by the time you're 40," and I was panicking because I was like, "I don't have the number that everybody says I should have." And then it was like a little light went off in my head when you guys explained reverse mortgage. I was like, "Oh my god, I do own my own home, though," which presumably I'll pay off one day. And there's an option, another income source that'll get me to that little hump that everybody was talking about. That's not to say don't save at all and don't plan at all, because, like any investment, while real estate is fairly secure, we never know what could happen, right? So you want to make sure, as Martin says, diversify your portfolio.
Well, it's also keep a balance. You gotta live for today, and tomorrow is important, but today is more important than tomorrow because the only thing that's guaranteed is probably the next minute of your life, right? So, and a lot of people say, when I retire, okay, well, when is that? In 15 years from now, you're planning to do all these things that you want to do today? Do them today. I mean, be wise with your money, but at the same time, you gotta live for today because tomorrow's a gift.
100%. For all of your mortgage questions and more little Confucius moments, get in touch with Martin Spalding and Fred at fredandmartin.com. Still to come, our property of the week, plus the answer to our trivia question of the week. That's coming up after we check traffic at the CJAD 800 Traffic Center with Jill Fitzgerald. This is Under One Roof MTL on CJAD 800. We're with you until 1 p.m. My favorite and your favorite segment of the week, our property of the week. LJ, what do you got for us?
Are you looking for a stunning condo in the heart of Montreal? Discover 1481 Rue Saint Andre in Ville Marie. This 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom condo is split over 2 renovated levels and includes 2 kitchens, appliances on both floors, and private gated parking. Just steps away from Barrie UQAM and Beaudry metro stations, it's surrounded by shops, parks, and vibrant restaurants. Whether as a unique home or income property, this gem could be yours for only $750,000. Don't miss out. Book your visit today. This property is super unique because it used to be used as an office space on the ground floor and obviously living upstairs. What my client ended up doing is he converted it into 2 separate units, and he actually rented it out almost like a duplex as 2 separate units for the last 5 years. He's decided to part ways with the investment now, but if you want to house hack effectively, rent out the basement while you live upstairs, or vice versa, or just rent out the entire property, or convert it back into one unit by just adding that staircase again between the units. All of these things are possible. Super cool opportunity for you. And then, if you're in the area to check it out, I suggest you stop by Toro Rosso to grab a meal. Stop by for some classic Italian cuisine. My go to there is their margarita pizza.
Oh, you can never go wrong with a margarita pizza. So delicious. I'm going to recap quickly what we learned this week. But first, I want to get to the answer to our trivia question of the week, brought to you by Felix and Norton Cookies. What type of real estate ownership allows multiple individuals to own a fraction of a property and use it for a specific time period each year? The answer is a timeshare. A timeshare, frequently used for vacation property situations where you're not necessarily going to be spending time there all year, maybe just for a few weeks every year. So you share it with somebody else. Guys, do you own a timeshare? Is this an avenue you've ever considered for a vacation property?
Nope.
I mean, I hate to say it, but every time I've heard about a timeshare, the conversation has ended with it's a scam. As recently as yesterday, I was speaking to our printer actually, who prints all of our brochures, materials, etc. And they knew somebody who recently bought one. They wanted to use it. They were supposed to have access to all these properties in New York City whenever they wanted, and they wanted to use it for the birthday of their daughter to go celebrate it in New York City in style. And they were booking it months in advance. I'm like, oh no, sorry that you can't use it those dates. It's impossible. Uh, It just every time I've heard about a timeshare, it's always not worth the way that it's been pitched to people when they buy it. And there's nothing I hate more than being lied to and really taking advantage of consumers that way.
It
I'll
it
go.
feels like the multi-level marketing of real estate, right? It's the MLM, it's the Mary Kay, it's the
Yeah, I'll go back to the start of our conversation today. And before you sign your timeshare contract, read the clauses in the contract and make sure that those 2 weeks of Christmas that you're hoping to use your timeshare are not blackout periods. Because you know what? You probably only have a couple of weeks vacation, you've got a timeshare, and it's not available when you actually really want to use it. So instead of having a timeshare, just go to a hotel.
yeah, probably a safer bet.
Right.
What did we learn this week? We learned a lot. This home economics special, I think, was really good because there was a lot of important information in here. What I took away from this conversation was one, it's important to create a budget and stick to it to truly understand how much you're spending each month and on what, and figure out where you may better allocate your funds. Two, make sure you pay your taxes on time. And three, remember to invest in your future and your retirement. Is there anything that I missed that you think is really important as a takeaway from today's show, LJ?
No, I mean, making sure that you have your budgets aligned for taxes and stuff, and we spoke about your tax rate obviously, but understanding how that works and how marginal tax rates work, and making sure you take advantage of all the tax-free accounts that we have, whether it's the tax advantage or tax-free. So just making sure you have all that under control and speaking to the right people so you can leverage them.
Martin, anything you would add?
So, what we discussed today is really the tip of the iceberg. So, I often get teased in the studio by my colleagues because I over prepare for these things. And so, last night I shared my crib notes for today's session. And I realized when I printed out my crib notes, I had 15 pages. So, clearly, we did not cover 15 pages, but things like household budget, debt management. Um, why to make sure that you get insurance. Insurance gives you peace of mind and it protects what you worked hard to accumulate. Home ownership. Don't overstretch yourself because there are so many expenses when you buy your first home that you don't have when you're renting an apartment. What else did I put down? Taxes. Pay your taxes. You're not going to avoid it. The governments are very patient. They'll wait for you forever. And what else did I? Investing in your future. Um, LJ mentioned it. Take advantage of everything, whether the company's offering it or the government's offering it. But any discretionary money you have, invest it. Because if it just sits there, because of inflation, it loses money on a day to day basis. So at least keep up with inflation. So whether it's a GIC or a high yield savings account, but anything that is discretionary, and even better, when you invest, you get the compound effect, right? And even if you're only making 5%, between 8 and 9 years, whatever you've invested has doubled in value, but you got to save. So, what we did today was just make you conscious of the fact that home economics is much vaster than just a household budget. It's everything that have to do with your money and how to best use your money to buy you security, buy you peace of mind, and plan for your future.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Very well said. And you should sell that 15-page document. It feels like there's a lot of great information in there. I gotta teach you how to do digital downloads as another income stream. That's pretty much it for us for this week. A reminder that Under One Roof MTL can be heard live every Sunday at noon right here on CJAD 800. To learn more about us and the show, visit the website underoneroofmtl.com. In the meantime, get in touch with LJ, Fred, and Martin individually for unique, tailored advice to your situation. LJ, where can people go to get in touch with you?
Stop by our website, ljrealties.com, or on all socials with the handle LJ Aguinaga, that's LJAGUINAGA, or LJ Realties, LJREALTIES. You can also call or text me at 514-500-4040. And if you need any property management services, our company, Plex Doctor, is looking to grow and expand this upcoming year. We can't wait to help you with all your property needs.
Amazing. Martin, where can people go to get in touch with you and Fred?
Very simple. FredMartin.com, FredandMartin.com, and one more time, FredandMartin.com. And if you just are calling to ask us questions on anything that has to do with mortgages, or you just want to shoot the breeze, give us a call. We're always happy to chat.
Yeah, Fred has good stories. He's lived a life, shall we say. He has.
He's an ex-restaurateur. So whenever you've been a restaurateur, you've got all what's it, Kitchen Confidential. So I'm sure there's a lot of confidential stuff that Fred can't talk about on the radio, but one-on-one with him, he'll share stories.
Ooh, that's a tease and a half. If you missed anything, you can listen to this show in its entirety on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you think somebody could benefit from our home economics lesson this week, send them this week's show. For LJ, Fred, and Martin, I'm Robin. This has been Under One Roof MTL.